man and woman were created for this earth for a reason. We complement each other in a lot of ways. And I think the more, I mean, there's a great study recently by Catalyst that showed there's only 15.3% of the Fortune 500 companies have women in the boardroom at the executive level. Of those companies, they get 53% better return on equity, 66% better return on capital. It shows that when we work together, men and women in leadership, we can make a very big difference, because we can't minimize the importance of sharing power and sharing the influence, especially when it comes to cultures and corporate cultures.
I remember my boss's boss asking me a question. He was a vice president of AT&T, and he said, "What do you think of my leadership team?" Which was, by the way, all men. And I said, well, there's an interesting article in a human resource paper or a human resource magazine called The Doppelganger Effect. And what it says is that I said, I look at your table, and all you'd have is doppelgangers. They're all the same. You know, they're just mimics of one another. And he looked at me and he said, I can't believe you said that. And I said, you asked me my opinion. You know, and I'll tell you my opinion. You can tell me you don't like it. Thanks for sharing. And he said, you know, that's really, really interesting that you say that. I said, look, you know, Tom, every single person that you have on your table has the exact same experiences. They went to the same kinds of schools, and they're all men. I said, why wouldn't you consider having a woman as one of the leaders of your organization? And about 6 months later, he promoted me. So. Good move.
Right. Whenever I see a board or top executives being all men, especially white men, I have to say, you know, I get a little tense because I don't really like that. I would love to know, though, you know, how much is it that women are choosing not to have life in balance and not wanting those positions, and then the women who want those positions not being allowed or feeling certain kind of, whether you call it the glass ceilings, obstacles, and then how could we help in terms of removing those obstacles for people who are very happy to go that distance?
It's interesting that you say that, because when I've been thinking over the last 10 years, you know, a lot for me has changed. I went from being, you know, a young, you know, on our own kind of person to getting married and having kids and moving up the ladder, and having the opportunity to learn from authentic leaders early on that, okay, I get to do this my way. And not only do I get to lead in the way that I'm comfortable with, because now that seems to be acceptable, and so that's awesome, but what do I do to make the next change for the groups that's coming up? So is the definition of being successful at your job working 16 hours behind that desk, or is it working some from home and some from the road and doing it when you can and making it more flexible? So there's lots of paths to where you want to go. And that's really what I've been trying to do, you know, with a boss that's very supportive of both men and women development. But really, how do you create different paths? Because I've had some great bosses who have let me kind of go a different way.
There's a lot of work still to do, but in the last 10 years, what for me I see has dramatically changed in this industry is that there is a recognition that diversity is, and inclusion, diversity and inclusion is definitely important to any company, and there's been, you know, business cases for it, but what I see now are what used to be informal have turned into formal programs or formal acknowledgement that, yes, we need more women in the boardroom, we need more women at the senior level, we need to ensure there's a acceptance of the differences within the workplace, whether that's the millennials, you know, and our Generation Y, and, you know, we have a recognition of that openly, which when I came into the industry, it was far from that.
I think the cable industry is one of the best industries for women to work in. I've always thought that. I still think that today. But at the end of the day, unless the societal pressures on us change, it doesn't matter how good our work environment is, if we're still expected to do all the kid maintenance, if we're still expected to buy all the gifts for the thing, clean the house and do all those things, it's really a lot harder for us to have that life balance. So it's interesting that I think that the cable industry is actually farther ahead in terms of how they look at women than my society around me.
But in the financial arena, I would say there's still a big struggle. I think there's a lot of
growth that can still take place, because I know, like, being an assistant and then being a director of administration, it was capped. It was almost impossible, even though you'd get in your reviews that you deserve to be vice president of administration, and you'd kind of bank on that every year, and then that review would come and they'd either forget to bring it up again or you'd bring it up, and you loved the company so much that you just kept on going, but you came to a reality that it wasn't going to change. And maybe it's a little bit better, but it's nowhere near maybe other opportunities within the cable industry.
It's just, you know, from what Joanne is saying, you know, in the financial investment banking business, your value is based on how much money you bring in every year. And you are always in competition with other companies as well as people within your organization to bring in the most money. And it becomes consuming, all-consuming. You don't look at what's going on personally or anything else. It's a strange dynamic.
How about the best practical advice you've ever gotten that applies to your work? For me, it's someone once said to me, if you're going into a room with somebody who you know is going to argue with you, sit next to them, don't sit across from them. And if you know what the argument is going to be about, lead with that. Or my other personal favorite, no is a complete sentence. Or actually something I learned from Colleen through our mutual friend, Tammy Smith, which is when you're facing something, ask yourself, is it kind, is it necessary? Before you take someone's face off.
Yeah.
So things like that, what have you learned along the way? Practical advice.
Don't ever think you're one of the boys.
Don't ever think you're one of the boys?
Makes for messy bathroom stuff.
I think some of the advice or the things that I've learned along the way that I'd pass on as advice is that when you're going into a situation where you know there's going to be confrontation or issues, work those ahead of time so that you come to the table and you have some sense of either your position or you maybe have made an ally in someone that you thought was going to be an adversary.
I think don't take yourself or your business too seriously. Enjoy.
Going back to dads, my dad was an orthopedic surgeon, so he wasn't a businessman, so to speak. But he gave me one piece of advice when I got out of college, and he said, just find something that you enjoy and that you're really good at. And then even within that, within what you're good at, find that one thing that you're really, really good at and focus on that. And he said, that's how you develop your career.
I suppose I always consider myself a cable baby, having grown up as John C's daughter. You know, and we had 3 tenets. You know, you do your homework, you agree with me, and then you work your butt off to make sure that we deliver. I mean, those were like the 3 tenets.
I also got 3 tenets from family business that I've tried to apply in corporate, and one is, you are no better than anyone else, no matter what you own or what your title is or how much money you have. And so don't ever treat someone like you are, and don't let them treat you as if they were. Second, know what you don't know, be honest about it, and hire people around you that are smarter than you in those areas. And 3, share the wealth. How much is enough? And that if you have more while others have little, it's not worth anything. So I've tried to apply those 3 principles.